January 15th, 1947, a morning walk turned into nightmare. Betty Berzinger was pushing her 3-year-old daughter in a stroller through the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. It was a crisp Wednesday morning, the kind of perfect California day that draws people from all over the world to chase their dreams in the City of Angels. As she walked along South Norton Avenue, something in a vacant lot caught her eye. At first she thought it was a discarded mannequin, pale, white, positioned oddly in the weeds. But as she got closer, her mind struggled to process what she was actually seeing. It wasn't a mannequin. It was a woman, cut in half, drained of blood, positioned with grotesque precision. Betty's scream shattered the morning silence. When LAPD officers arrived at the scene, even the most hardened detectives were shaken by what they found. The victim was a young woman, approximately 22 years old. But what had been done to her body defied comprehension. She had been severed completely in half at the waist. The two sections of her body were placed about a foot apart, arms positioned above her head, legs spread apart. It looked staged, arranged carefully as if the killer wanted to create a specific image. But the horror didn't end there. The victim's face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating a grotesque Glasgow smile. Her body showed signs of torture, rope marks on her wrists and ankles, bruising across her torso. Chunks of flesh had been removed from her thighs. Most disturbing of all, the body had been meticulously cleaned, completely drained of blood, washed so thoroughly that no blood was found at the scene. Whoever did this had spent hours with the corpse, somewhere else, before bringing it to this vacant lot for display. This wasn't just murder, this was a presentation, a message, a work of sick, twisted artistry. Identifying the victim. The woman's fingerprints were sent to the FBI. Within hours, they had a match. Her name was Elizabeth Short, 22 years old, originally from Massachusetts. She had come to Los Angeles with dreams of becoming an actress, just like thousands of other young women drawn to Hollywood's false promises of stardom. Friends knew her by a nickname that would soon become infamous, the Black Dahlia. The name came from her appearance. Elizabeth loved wearing black clothing, black dresses, black hats, black everything. Combined with her porcelain skin and dark hair, she created a striking film noir aesthetic. Some say the nickname was inspired by the 1946 film, The Blue Dahlia. Others claimed it came from a Long Beach drugstore where she was a regular customer.
But now, that nickname would be attached to one of the most brutal, unsolved murders in American history. Who was Elizabeth Short? Elizabeth Ann Short was born in 1924 in Massachusetts. Her father disappeared when she was young. The family believed he'd committed suicide, but he'd actually abandoned them and moved to California. Elizabeth eventually reconciled with him and moved west to join him in 1943. But the relationship was troubled, and Elizabeth soon struck out on her own. She bounced between Massachusetts, Florida, and California, working odd jobs, staying with friends, always chasing the dream of making it in Hollywood. By all accounts, Elizabeth was beautiful, charming, and desperate to be noticed. She frequented Hollywood nightclubs, dressed impeccably, flirted with servicemen, and told people she was going to be a star someday. But Hollywood is a city that chews up dreamers and spits them out. Elizabeth struggled to find legitimate work. She lived off the kindness of friends, stayed in cheap hotels, and some reports suggest she may have been involved in prostitution, though this has never been confirmed. In the weeks before her death, Elizabeth's behavior became erratic. She told different people different stories about where she was living, who she was dating, where she was going. Some friends reported she seemed scared, as if she was running from someone. On January 9, 1947, 6 days before her body was discovered, Elizabeth was last seen alive at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She told the desk clerk she was going to meet her sister. She never made it.
Perhaps the most compelling suspect is Dr. George Hodel, a wealthy Los Angeles physician. The theory that he was the Black Dahlia killer was popularized by his own son, former LAPD detective Steve Hodel, in a 2003 book. The evidence against Dr. Hodel is circumstantial, but disturbing. He had the medical knowledge to perform the precise bisection of the body. He lived near where the body was found. He was known to have violent tendencies and was accused of molesting his own daughter. Charges were dropped. In 1950, LAPD secretly bugged his home. The recordings captured him making potentially incriminating statements, including, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now." Steve Hodel found photographs in his father's possession that he believes show Elizabeth Short, though this is disputed. Dr. Hodel had connections to the Hollywood scene and knew many of the places Elizabeth frequented. But Dr. Hodel was never charged. He moved to Asia in 1950 and died in 1999, taking whatever secrets he had to his grave. Leslie Dillon. Leslie Dillon was a 27-year-old bellhop, an aspiring crime writer who became a prime suspect in 1948. He had written to a police psychiatrist asking about sexual sadism, showing disturbing knowledge of the case. When questioned, Dillon confessed, then recanted. He provided details that only the killer would know, but also made claims that didn't match the evidence. He was released due to lack of evidence. Years later, some investigators believed Dillon was involved, but had an accomplice, possibly someone in law enforcement, which would explain why the case was never solved. Mark Hansen. Mark Hansen was a Hollywood nightclub and theater owner who Elizabeth had stayed with shortly before her murder. Some investigators believed he was jealous when Elizabeth showed interest in other men. Hansen was questioned but never charged. He maintained his innocence until his death. Dozens of others. The list of suspects goes on. A Navy medic, a mortician, a surgeon, a nightclub owner, even Orson Welles was briefly considered. Over 60 people confessed to the murder, all proven to be false confessions. The taunting notes. One of the most chilling aspects of the case was what happened after the body was discovered. On January 24, 1947, 9 days after the murder, the Los Angeles Examiner received a phone call. A man's voice, described as calm and mocking, said, "I am the Black Dahlia killer. I will send you some of her belongings." The next day, a package arrived at the newspaper. Inside were Elizabeth's social security card, birth certificate, photographs, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. The items had been soaked in gasoline, an apparent attempt to destroy fingerprints. The address book had been carefully edited. Several pages were torn out. Names were missing. It seemed the killer was playing a game, giving clues while withholding critical information. Then the notes started arriving. Letters addressed to newspapers and police made from words cut out of magazines and pasted on paper. They taunted investigators. Here it is, turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger. But January 29th came and went. No one turned themselves in. More notes arrived over the following weeks, each one mocking, teasing, promising revelations that never came. Then, suddenly, they stopped. Were they from the real killer or a sick hoaxer taking advantage of the media frenzy? No one knows for certain. The theories. Theory 1. A serial killer. Some investigators believe the Black Dahlia murder was not an isolated incident. The level of mutilation, the careful posing of the body, the trophy-taking, Elizabeth's clothing and purse were never found. These are all hallmarks of serial killer behavior. Several other unsolved murders in Los Angeles in the 1940s showed similar characteristics. Were they connected? Was there a serial killer operating in Hollywood, targeting young women who no one would miss? Theory 2. a crime of passion. Others believe Elizabeth knew her killer. Perhaps she was involved in a relationship that turned violent. The personal nature of the facial mutilation suggests rage and a need to silence the victim permanently. Theory 3, a cover-up. The most disturbing theory is that someone powerful, perhaps someone in law enforcement or Hollywood elite, committed the murder and used their influence to ensure the case was never solved. This would explain why certain suspects were never seriously pursued and why evidence mysteriously disappeared. Theory 4, organized crime. Some researchers suggest Elizabeth may have been involved with organized crime figures, either willingly or unwittingly. Her murder could have been a message to others. Why was it never solved? The Black Dahlia case remains unsolved for a few reasons. 1, the crime scene was compromised before proper investigation could occur. 2, too many false confessions wasted investigative resources. 3, media interference contaminated witnesses and evidence. 4, forensic science limitations of the 1940s meant crucial evidence couldn't be properly analyzed. 5, possible corruption within the LAPD may have protected certain suspects. 6, Elizabeth's transient lifestyle made it difficult to establish a clear timeline of her final days. The legacy. Elizabeth Short's murder has become one of the most famous unsolved cases in American history. Her story has inspired countless books, movies, TV shows, and conspiracy theories. But beneath all the sensationalism is a tragic reality. A 22-year-old woman with dreams of stardom was tortured, murdered, and mutilated. Her killer was never brought to justice. Her death became entertainment. Today, Elizabeth Short is buried in Oakland, California. Her headstone reads simply, Daughter, Elizabeth Short, 1924-1947. The name Black Dahlia doesn't appear on her grave. Perhaps that's fitting. In death, she became a legend, a mystery, a cultural phenomenon. But in life, she was just Elizabeth, a young woman trying to make it in Hollywood, whose dreams ended in a vacant lot on a cold January morning. The unanswered questions. Who killed Elizabeth Short? Where was she held and tortured before her body was dumped? Why was she chosen as a victim? What happened during those 6 missing days between her last confirmed sighting and the discovery of her body? Were the letters and phone calls really from the killer? Did the killer strike again, leaving other victims in their wake? And perhaps most haunting of all, how many people walked past Elizabeth Short in those final days, in nightclubs, on streets, in hotel lobbies, and never knew they'd encountered a woman about to become one of the most famous murder victims in American history? The Black Dahlia case remains open. The LAPD still accepts tips. But as the decades pass, the likelihood of solving the case grows dimmer. Somewhere, the truth exists. Perhaps in a forgotten box of evidence. Perhaps in the memories of someone now long dead. Perhaps in secrets that will never be revealed. The City of Angels keeps its darkest secrets well. Only the dead have seen the end of war. Plato. Short. The Black Dahlia has remained one of America's most infamous and interesting unsolved murder mysteries since it captured the attention of the country in 1947. Her body was found in a lawless, rumbled-up, second-hand neighborhood in West LA, known locally as Dallas Park. She was a destitute, Hollywood-loving woman who had never had a job for longer than 2 months.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now before the next nightmare